Both Donald Trump and Kamala Harris wrapped up their U.S. presidential campaigns in the battleground state of Pennsylvania, which possesses the highest number of electoral college votes. In 2016, Trump shocked the Democratic Party when he managed to wrestle away Pennsylvania, a state they had won for the prior 3 decades. SABC News Correspondent Ira Spitzer joins us now from Pennsylvania. Ira, very good evening to you. Well, at least from my end, you're in the state where Donald Trump held a rally to complain about gaps in the bulletproof shields surrounding him. He even suggested he would have no concerns about reporters being shot at if there was another assassination attempt against him. What's the sentiment on the ground?
Well, there is a sense of tension here in Pennsylvania. I'm in the largest city, Philadelphia, right now, and voters have been coming out to the polls all day, including to where I'm standing right now. Polls remain open on Election Day for just under 4 more hours, and then the election will essentially be wrapped up, except in one county in the east of the state. That county has extended voting hours for 2 hours because of a software malfunction that has apparently affected some ballot scanners in the east of the state. So there is, of course, as you mentioned, this swing state is tremendously important to both the Donald Trump and Kamala Harris campaigns. There are 19 electoral college votes. That's the most of any of the swing states in the United States. And most people believe that the road to the presidency will need to go through this state. And it was a strongly blue state for decades, but then in 2016, Donald Trump, of course, flipped the state, and that was a huge factor in his ultimate victory, and Trump supporters hoping he can do the same thing again. But in this strongly Democratic city, Philadelphia, there are strong signs of support for Kamala Harris, and the vice president hoping that her supporters here in places like Philadelphia will turn out at the levels needed for her to ultimately prevail in this election.
Kamala Harris has led in Pennsylvania since the start of August, sometimes by 2 or 3 points. How much have the polls tightened since then?
The polls have definitely tightened since Kamala Harris really had a bump both here in Pennsylvania as well as around the country following Joe Biden stepping down and the announcement of her candidacy. But then we've seen over the last couple months since that time, we have seen the former president make up some or maybe all of that ground. And in Pennsylvania, depending on which poll you look at, both candidates can be leading in the polls by a narrow margin. This is a state where the election workers are not allowed to actually begin counting absentee ballots, people who submitted their ballots early by mail. They've only begun counting those ballots at 7 a.m. local time this morning. So as a result, we're not expecting to have a decisive victory for either candidate because of just how close this is supposed to be. But the former president, Donald Trump, some of the main issues that have been driving his supporters and his voters, the top issue is the economy. Voters very concerned about inflation and the cost of living. So that has largely helped the former president. And of course, he's made a huge deal of immigration, talking about the crisis at the U.S. southern border. So whereas in a place like Philadelphia, a blue part of the state, that may not have much impact across rural Pennsylvania, his immigration message really appears to be hitting home, and that is one of the reasons why this election is so close right now.
How would you say Kamala Harris has positioned herself with these elections, with Donald Trump speaking big on the economy and immigration? What has resonated with potential voters for Kamala Harris?
Well, probably first and foremost of the messages that Kamala Harris has been driving home is talking to voters both here in Pennsylvania and nationwide about the dangers of another Trump presidency. Certainly the threat to democracy and really making people remember the situation on January 6, 2021, where Trump's supporters stormed the U.S. Capitol, fueled by his false claims that Joe Biden had not really won the election. So the vice president warning people that a vote for Donald Trump will be a return to that sort of chaos and that sort of anti-democratic thinking that many people, of course, worry about. And another huge issue for the Harris campaign, a winning issue potentially, has been women's reproductive rights. Trump appointed 3 justices during his term that ultimately led to overturning the Roe versus Wade Supreme Court decision that protected women's right to have abortion access. So Kamala Harris saying that women's reproductive rights is an issue that should help bring female voters out to the polls, and all voters really, against the former president.
You make mention of female voters. We know that of the over 80 million votes counted so far, 54% are made up of women. Is that an indication of an outcome at all as we take stock of the number of women who are going out and casting their votes?
Well, it has been one of the most interesting aspects of this election is this gender gap that we've seen in a lot of the polling going into Election Day, whereas Donald Trump has focused much of his energy and his message on trying to appeal to male voters, and whereas Kamala Harris, in some ways with the reproductive rights issues and also perhaps by being a female herself, has had more support from female voters than perhaps previous presidential candidates have had. So that gap could prove to be decisive, and we potentially have seen some signs of that in early voting, but it's hard to say until the rest of the people come out to the polls whether that is something significant, or whether the gender gap will not actually be enough to change the fortunes of this election.